Hi, I'm Paul Casey, and today I'm going to talk about ASC 606, the Accounting Standards Codification for Revenue Recognition, revenue from contracts with customers. So I've been working on revenue recognition for about 14 years in a variety of capacities, and this model that I'm going to share with you today, this structure, came out of that work, and it's allowed me to work very quickly, efficiently, and easily to be able to tackle some of the most complex problems in revenue recognition efficiently and easily. So let's just jump right in. So revenue recognition basically has two fundamental elements. When added together, allows you to recognize revenue. The first is a clear sales contract, and the second is performance and delivery under that contract. So once we have a clear sales contract and performance and delivery under that contract, then we can recognize revenue. So that's my simple model. And there's an article I published in LinkedIn in November of 2019 that you can read where it details all this and has some good graphics for you. But that article is what we're going to walk through and talk through today. And it obviously doesn't address all the complexity with revenue recognition, or there wouldn't be 700 pages associated with the 606 codification, or the update. But this understanding a clear sales contract and performance and delivery under that contract is extremely powerful in terms of understanding where you are in terms of your work, in terms of what you're trying to do. Whether you're trying to convince an auditor that the policy and your implementation of a policy is correct and is the right interpretation of the accounting for your book of business, and you want to get the auditor's clean opinion, or whether you're trying to establish your accounting policy the first time, you're just trying to understand your book of business and then say, really, well, this is the way we should recognize revenue. Whatever the application you're going to have for this model, I'm confident that you'll find it is the quickest and easiest way to think about the problem or to think about the job or the task involved with revenue recognition. So in other words, we really just have these two simple steps: a clear sales contract, performance and delivery on that contract, and we can recognize revenue. And now, what is a clear sales contract? Well, a clear sales contract similarly just has three simple elements to it. It has the product, it has the price, and it has finally the payment terms for the price for the product. So we have product, price, and payment. Those are the three elements that we need to clearly understand or establish in our contract, whether it's written on paper or if it's done through business practices and an oral agreement, a spoken agreement, that could be possible too. But really, a clear sales contract, we look for the product, the price, and the payment. Now, when you have those three, and then you add performance of the service or a delivery of a product under that clear sales contract, you can recognize revenue. So now we've described the model at its simplest level, and we only have a few things to track. We got our two parts, clear sales contract, performance and delivery, and now we have a really solid understanding of what a clear contract is. Obviously, it's got to have the parties mentioned if it's a large corporate contract, and some of the legal elements protecting the seller from liability and things like that. But largely, the three elements you're looking for is what's the product, what is the price of that product, and what are the payment terms for that product. If those are all clearly listed, then you can recognize revenue. Once you have ambiguity or a lot of fuzziness around any one of those three, then you may have to hold on to revenue recognition until you're really clear on whether those three elements are present in the business agreement. So with that, now that we have a simple structure that we can understand and we can follow, and you can see all this in the article I published on LinkedIn in November of 2019. So we have this simple structure that anyone could easily keep on a single piece of paper. And now that allows us to do work. So let's jump right into one of the more complex areas and more subtle aspects of revenue recognition to see how the model works and put it to use. So let's use the case of a large software provider. We'll use medical software since I have experience with that. And if that large medical software provider is selling that software to a hospital or a large clinic, doesn't matter the customer, but that software is very complex. And so the software requires installation, configuration, and education of the users in order for the software to be useful to the customer. So in that case, we're going to look at a contract with a customer and figure out whether, well, we're selling the software and we're selling this service to implement, often called implementation. And what we're doing is installing, configuring the software, and educating the users at the hospital. So the question becomes, well, when can we recognize revenue? Well, in the accounting literature, they use the term performance obligation to describe any product or service. This is a term that the accounting literature came up with in the course of creating the 606 guidance, which is actually a pretty poor term to be using, because performance, that term, is commonly understood to be associated with service only. So performance is usually not, although it can be in some cases, a car can perform well, etc. But as far as the delivery, the performance and delivery aspect of revenue recognition, which is a very fundamental law of nature, if you will, the performance concept really only applies to services, and it's delivery that applies to products. Is the product delivered? Now, does the product perform? You know, that's another concept. But basically, if you're going to recognize revenue, once you've delivered your product, assuming it's not going to break on site, you can recognize your revenue for that product. If it's a toaster, if it's an automobile, once it's delivered to the customer has possession, well, then you have the right to recognize revenue, assuming you have a clear sales contract. So the concept of performance obligation crept into the literature in an attempt to capture the abstract concept of products or services that are obligated to be delivered in the contract, you know, under the normal contract. So, but it's a poor choice of words. So I normally never use performance obligations in normal discussions until everybody understands what they are. Products and services is much easier. So in the case of a product, we have a toaster. If it's delivered, we can recognize revenue provided we have a clear sales contract for the price of that contract and when we get paid. So, so when we get into software and services, oftentimes if software is sold with a service, implementation service, that only the seller of that software could provide that service, and no other third party can provide that service. Now we have a case where the software by itself is worthless to the customer unless that service is provided. So in those cases, the service and the software are combined. They are combined into one single product, which is called a single performance obligation in the accounting literature. And so we have the concept that really you aren't delivering your product in layman's terms by just dropping them a disk of the software in the mail and saying, well, just install it on your computers and use it. There's no real value or utility given to the hospital by delivering that software because the hospital can't install it themselves. They can't make use of it. And so when that is the case, I'm just saying that, I'll give an example, that in the marketplace there could be a case like that. And once that's the case, we have to consider the implementation services our company is providing when we sell that software to be integral to the product. In other words, there's no distinction from the customer standpoint of value being delivered until those implementation services are completely provided. And now we move into, well, how do we recognize revenue? Well, when both those two things are delivered, and let's say we have a software license term of, say, 5 years. They're going to get that software license. They get to use it for 5 years. They have support and maintenance on it. But the implementation services would be amortized over a 5-year period to recognize that really those services are integral to that software license. And since the software license is a 5-year term, we would put those two together as a single performance obligation. So now if we go back to our model, very simply, we had a clear sales contract. We have performance and delivery. In this case, we were trying to understand whether our services really should be amortized over the life of the software license, the 5-year term of the software license. And we came to the conclusion that, well, it's because the product or service is not, there's no performance or delivery under the product or service until the 5-year term is up. So if that 5-year term expires and the software performed as expected and the customer really has no claim to say we didn't really get what we paid for, then we're safe to recognize revenue. And that's why revenue gets recognized over that long period of time. So there's an example of using the model, very simple. We got a clear sales contract, performance and delivery, And in this case, the performance and delivery was software and services. And so this is one of those more subtle and complex areas of revenue recognition that occurs in the marketplace, but makes perfect sense when you think in these simple terms. And you can use this simple model across all of the other various complex elements of 606. And I can get into more of that on other videos. So thanks for joining me, and I hope you found it useful.